with the notion essentially that if you're paid to prepare a tax return, and that's actually a critical distinction. I know there's been some question, what about volunteers? For purposes of this activity, we're talking about folks who are paid, and to prepare all or substantially all of the tax return, you'll need to obtain a P10. Now, let me go back to those two questions that I was talking about. We don't have any systemic way of checking to see whether people have a tax compliance problem or not, at least now. We also do not have an easy way of figuring out whether someone's been convicted of a felony in the last 10 years, because that process involves taking your fingerprints and then asking the FBI to give us a report that tells us. For any of you who have EFINs, you've been through that process, or you will go through that process. But that's not something the IRS could in any way feasibly do in the 4 months that we have to assign folks P10s. So our objective is to get everyone to have a P10. We will charge a user fee. And so we've been developing the user fee. The user fee is designed to cover the costs of administering return preparer regulation. I'm not going to give you the number because I don't know it quite yet. But I will tell you it's likely to be under $200 for 3 years. Now that is likely to be more than the EA fee, but I want to talk about the EA fee for just a second. If you are an enrolled agent and you are going to renew on the 3-year cycle, what we're looking at is essentially crediting you against, so once you pay the P10 fee, when you come in and renew for being an enrolled agent, what we're looking at is giving you credit for what you've already paid on the P10 fee, so you're not paying twice. I noticed that in your testimony, we're looking at it. I have to. I'm done. I'll see you guys later. But we're trying to figure out a way to say, the idea behind a user fee is to recover the cost. To the extent we're doing the same thing under the P10 fee, then we don't want to have to go through it again and require and ask you to double pay. So I saw that in your submission. It's something we're very aware of, and we're trying to figure out how to make that happen. It'll most likely happen not on the P10 fee itself. We're going to try and conform everything to the P10 fee, so to the P10 itself. So the EFIN may eventually fold into a P10 so that you don't have to have multiple INs, right? Generally having an in is good, more than one not so good. That's my theory.
So the cycles you're thinking about the cycles as well? So you're going to have a P10 cycle of 3 years.
So let me continue. So once you obtain your P10, it'll be good for 3 years, all right? At the end of 3 years, a couple of things will have had to happen if you want to renew your P10 and retain it. First of all, you will have had to take a competency exam and pass it, and I'll cover that in a minute. You will also have to have completed continuing education, which I'll describe in a minute. But I want to go back to the 2 questions we're going to ask people because I think it's going to matter. We aren't able to systemically check your tax status or your felony compliance, but we do believe that there are some folks who will actually answer those questions appropriately. In other words, yes or no, depending on the way you phrase the question. We want to give people a due process right. Because we're extending return preparer regulation under the Circular 230 umbrella, the way we're doing that is to redefine representation before the IRS to include tax preparation. Once you do that, you afford people a set of due process rights. And frankly, if pulling a P10 means that you can no longer act professionally, we need to accord people a set of rights to determine whether or not they should actually be given a chance, even if they do have a tax problem, or there's a felony conviction. It turns out, believe it or not, that there are some felonies that, at the state level, that are a little absurd. And for example, apparently, I'm not sure in some southern state that will remain nameless, allowing your dog to poop on the sidewalk can be a felony. Now, you may not get convicted of it, but what we want to do is look at what kind of felony conviction, are there mitigating circumstances, and so on. So when you're on the website, you put your basic information in, you answer yes, I have a conviction, a felony conviction in the last 10 years, or no, I'm not compliant on my taxes. You'll get a pop-up screen that says, in general, either of these conditions may disqualify you for eligibility for practice before the IRS. However, if you believe that there are mitigating circumstances that should be considered, please provide an explanation here. We'll also allow people to upload documents, which is something the IRS doesn't do a lot of, but we're moving in that direction with modernized e-file. So you can scan and attach documents to support whatever case you make. If you respond, in other words, if you provide some explanation and or documents, then we will take the time to review them and give you an interim P10. All right? So Anybody who does actually respond will get a P10. If you say nothing, if you just say, no, I'm not current on my tax obligations and provide us no information, we will not give you a P10. All right, so what we're trying to do is identify those folks who are likely to actually have a reason to work with us to become tax professionals. Now, maybe not everyone's going to make it through the process, but we're going to give them a chance. The other thing is, once you sign up for your P10 and complete the form, you will electronically sign it under penalty of perjury. So if you forgot to mention that tax felony that you had 3 years ago, and we find out about it later, which I'll get to in a moment, we don't have to give you any due process rights. You've perjured yourself right then and there. All right? So as you can imagine, this is a little sensitive for us. We're going to put 1 million people through this system in 4 months. We're not going to have an automatic check on any of these things. And you know that our IG has already started to write the report. You know what the headline's going to say, right? IRS authorizes, registers, whatever you want to call it, tax felons, child molesters, you name it. Yeah, something. And we know that. So our mitigation strategies essentially boil down to working with the people who self-identify, and then there are 2 other things that will happen. One, we will build an automatic compliance check-in for everybody. So that will include people who are unenrolled as well as enrolled agents, as well as CPAs, as well as anybody who obtains a P10 to determine whether you have an outstanding balance in a collection status that has not been resolved. If you do, and we haven't worked out exactly what those parameters are, we will be able to identify that systemically. We'll run a program that identifies folks against our database, and we'll probably do it annually or semi-annually, twice a year. And then we will identify those folks and actually work with them. Again, due process rights will attach to them, but we will have an automated way of determining whether folks are compliant with their taxes. We won't have an automated way of doing the felony check. So here's what's likely to happen there. The next thing that we're going to require taxpayers to do, tax professionals to do, once they obtain their P10s, if they are not already covered under Circular 230, is to take an exam. Actually, one of 2 exams to start. We anticipate that the online registration system will be available September 1. The exam, I think I've just covered tax compliance. There we go, competency testing. The exam we anticipate will be available, let's just say May or June of 2010. All right? We still have to get a vendor, we have to develop the questions, we have to make sure. 2011, thank you. Someone looked at me, I was like, why is it looking at me that way? 2011, I'm already behind. There are a lot of vendors out there that can do this. As you know, Prometrics does the EA exam today. There's one, another might be Kaplan, I don't know. We understand there are 4 or 5 big companies that have the capacity to do this in a nationwide way. What we're envisioning is that you'd have to go to a physical location. The test would be online, but it'd be proctored, so you'd have to provide an ID. And we are looking at asking the vendor to obtain fingerprints at that point, so that we would actually do the background check as part of the exam process, right? So you take the competency test, or one of them, and I'll talk about those in a moment. At the same time, we might be able to handle the volumes of people. I mean, 1 million people through a system in 4 months is impossible. And if we spread it out a little bit, we might be able to build the background checks into the exam process. There will be another fee for the exam, and probably a fee to do the background check. Those aren't cheap, believe it or not. The FBI charges us a fee every time we send them a fingerprint card. And then we actually have to have people who, once the report comes back, it's not like there's an automatic FBI says yes or no. What has to happen is people have to be trained to review the record to see what it says. If it's clean, all good, no problem. But if there's anything on it, again, we want to look at it and understand what's there before we make a determination. That costs money.